tonight our speaker is Rebecca Pollon, and she worked at Rossmoor for 9 years as a landscape manager and a maintenance person, and she's going to be talking to us about why it can be difficult to get natives into large entities like HOAs. Rebecca, thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And yeah, like I said earlier before the recording started, I sort of offered to Stephanie to give this presentation just because, you really have to know the challenges from the other side if you're going to come up with any kind of sustainable solution to solve for them. So I'm hoping that this will be a little bit more of a conversation than just a me talking at you. And yeah, so we'll take it from there. Oops. So first of all, hi, my name is Rebecca Pollon. I'm a landscape manager. I've been in the industry since 2001. But the vast majority of what I'll be talking about today comes from my experience at Rossmoor, which is a senior community in Walnut Creek. It's actually 22 different HOAs. It's 1,800 acres. There's 10,000 residents, and every resident has an opinion, which, is fair enough, but that will come into play later in the conversation. As I mentioned, it's a senior community, so people are there present on the site a lot and can be very involved. We landscaped the front and the backyards, so it's a little different than a lot of HOAs. Some HOAs, you at least have some garden space to yourself. That's typically not the case at Rossmoor. And there is a deer population like you would not believe. I mean, yeah, I won't say there are as many deer as people, but there are an incredible amount of deer. So my objective for today, as I mentioned earlier, is really to understand the management challenges so that you can navigate them and that you can understand the origin of a lot of the pushback that everybody's inevitably getting. So, a little hint, it's not the plants that are difficult to manage. It's, this vast amount of differing opinions. And, every person is different. And so trying to manage that can be very challenging. And just a little warning, these are my opinions that, yes, they are formed through experience. They are obviously not gospel. Many people are going to disagree with me, probably very strongly. So please, get from this what you will. So I'll talk about a couple of what I'll call hard truths. Hard truth number one is that a landscaper's job, first and foremost, is to make it pretty all the time. Obviously, people's, definition of pretty varies incredibly, but generally people want to see a landscape that is lush and healthy, colorful. Color, I used to say, was the number one request I would get. People want color, color, color. People want to see that their landscape is being maintained, and you don't think that people care that much about evergreen, but they very much do. And people have very short memory spans. The amount of times where somebody would see a plant and say, oh my gosh, that's so gorgeous, I want one of those. Fast forward 6 months when that plant has gone dormant and they're like, that thing, you got to take that out, it's awful. So, landscaping generally is seasonal. Native plants, perhaps even more so. So some actual comments that I got along the way. This looks like a bundle of sticks. It looks like a weed. It looks dry. It looks gray, and it looks dead. So out of curiosity, have any of you experienced this kind of sentiment? Maybe not.
I mean, we definitely kept some of this in mind when choosing our plants, like why we picked an evergreen. It's a holly leaf cherry in the courtyard because this other non-native plant, which has since died, this other tree, was like, why did we pick something that doesn't have leaves for so much of the year? So I totally hear you on that one. And then I also was trying to think about what's in bloom at different times or looks better at different times, so there's enough going on. And things that bloom for a long period of time. Yeah, I definitely hear you on that one.
Yeah, and I'm sure you ran into the challenge where, a lot of the native plants are just the most beautiful thing you've ever seen in May. And then, they're sort of, maybe they're not exactly dormant, but they're dormant, for lack of a better word, for 9 or 10 months.
Yeah.
So
I'm
really
trying to think,
in on
yeah.
the plants that are
And
kind
thinking about that, because of course the photo, sometimes you look things up, it's showing it its most peak beautiful, but if that's only
Yeah.
a short time, you got to think about, well, what's it going to look like the rest of the year? And
right.
is it going to look good enough? Maybe has enough of a shape or color or something that looks interesting enough the rest of the year.
Yeah,
But I
exactly.
think part of it is education, like
Yes.
what looks like a bundle of sticks to me these days actually looks beautiful because they're dried flower heads and I see the birds are still on them. And I know when I started the tour 20 years ago, people assumed right off the bat that native plant gardens were ugly, weedy, unattractive, and I don't know, there's one other one other word. And I think now hopefully people are getting the idea that even if they're not looking like they came out of house beautiful all the time, there's another beauty in them, which is that they're functional. But that's a whole education thing. It's not what people see and it's not what they want to see, maybe particularly at their age.
Yeah, that certainly played a factor in my experience. But even just for people who are not of an advanced age, you're right that it's an education and it's a very slow moving education.
I think for deciduous trees, I try to point out one that in the middle of the winter they let so much more sun in.
Mhm.
They have that advantage, and some places especially would be dark and gloomy with evergreens in the wintertime. And I also point out that to me, I think actually deciduous trees, people always talk about leaves dropping all the time. And in my experience, it's the evergreen trees that are dropping leaves year round. It's the deciduous trees. It's like, okay, for 2 or 4 weeks a year, they're dropping their leaves, but it's actually, if you want to remove the leaves, which again, we want to try to leave them, but if you're going to, remove leaves when they drop, then deciduous trees actually have an advantage. So I try to point that out too.
Yeah. One of the things that I talk about a lot also is, seasonality is what makes a landscape dynamic. It's different from day to day to day. And a tree that's evergreen may be beautiful in its own way. But in my opinion, sometimes I'm like, well, I'm bored. Like I want to see it change color and I want to see it bloom and I want to see it do all these things. So to me, that dynamism of a landscape is really important.
And some people do appreciate seasonality and want to enjoy the season. So
oh yeah, fall color is just one of the most beautiful. Oh yeah, don't even get me started. Okay, so moving on, we went through all this. Hard truth number 2 is that in an HOA, majority rules. So we are a group of people who very much appreciate native plants. That may not be the case of the majority of the people. And like Kathy mentioned, it is it's an educational process that takes a long time. And so landscapers work on behalf of the board of directors, which, I'm sure you all know, and the board works on behalf of the residents. But you need to get to a point where amongst the residents, there is that critical mass, that tipping point where everybody is willing to embrace native plants. And I don't think we're there yet. I think it's happening, but slowly. And as an aside, I'm sure you guys all know about the new water rules that are coming out for HOAs. They're getting rid of functional grass. Has everybody heard about this?
No.
Non-functional turf.
Yes, exactly.
Rossmoor has
Sorry,
a ton of
non-functional.
grass, doesn't it?
Sorry, say that.
Rossmoor has a ton of grass, doesn't it?
So much. So
What
much.
does it do?
It's going to be a fundamental change and it's going to take
Mm.
a lot of education. But at this point, there is no choice to be made. So they're going to have to do it, whether they, are in agreement or not. But anyway, so I think that that's going to change things, in the native plant direction in a very big way.
Rebecca, can you talk a little bit more about what that is that's coming? I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, so
About
there's
the grass.
I believe it's a state law. Basically by the end of 2029, they're phasing out all non-functional turf grass for everything that isn't single family residential. So for HOAs, for commercial properties, for school properties, And, you know, they define they define functional turf fairly liberally. If it's a gathering area or an area where your kids play softball or whatever, then that's fine. But if it's for decorative purposes only, you'll no longer be able to water it. So, you know, they're banning it in effect, not because they're going to make you take it out, but if you can't water it, it's going to die or look terrible. So yeah, so that is sort of coming down the pike. It's being phased in, and I think by 2030 is when it will be fully implemented, the new ordinance.
Where could I find out more information about that?
That's a good question. The East Bay Mud website, I would guess, has information on that, but maybe
Okay,
just Google something like California non-functional turf ordinance, and some information will come up.
thank you.
Kathy Kramer sent me some information on that point.
All right, is that you, Patricia?
No, that was Mary Ewing.
I'm Mary.
Aye.
If you can find it, you can post it in the chat, but I don't know. I don't feel that I could do that myself.
Somebody did just put a link in the chat,
Okay.
Oh, you did?
and it's in effect in Santa Clara County already.
Oh, really?
Clara Valley Water District. Yeah, it's
Uh,
not well known. I'm not sure it's really being enforced, but it's the official policy.
Okay.
and my understanding is it's potable water that is being
Correct.
banned, but not recycled water. I may be wrong on that point. I
think
don't
you're
know
right.
how we would recycle water at our
Oh.
HOA.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
you're right also. Yeah, so anyway.
But
Um,
I mean, recycled water can be problematic because it could have more minerals or salts in it.
Mm-hmm.
and sediments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I'm in an HOA and I'm on the landscape committee here, and I'm wondering, can you tell me the difference between potable and recycled?
Potable is like what comes out of your tap, what you can drink.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And so anything that's provided to you by the water district. Recycled water is, you know, it's typically, I think it's recycled wastewater, isn't it? And it comes in
Oh.
purple pipes, and I think it also comes from the water district, but it's not drinkable. Potable
Yes,
water just
okay.
ain't drinkable.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So, so we have all recycled water on our common grounds.
Oh, nice.
So are
Wow.
you saying that because we have all grass here, so you're saying by the end of 2029, we would have to take it out, even if it is recycled water?
No, if it's
No.
recycled, I think you're fine.
Oh, we're okay. Okay, got it. Got
Yeah.
it. All right.
Carla, where do you live?
I live in Marin Lagoon in San Rafael. We're on a lagoon, and we're trying to change, you know, the landscaping over to drought resistance because, you know, our recyclable water is expensive too.
Mhm.
You know, it's gone up, it's doubled.
Mm.
So we want to change over to the you know, more drought resistant plants around the lagoon instead of grass.
Okay.
Do they use pesticides and fertilizer?
Yes,
Oh my goodness.
they used to. They used to. Now we're changed. We changed over to organic, but it's very, very expensive organic. So you know, our dues have gone up quite a bit because we've done the organic, and now to change over to you're saying native flowers versus drought resistant. So I'm not sure about that either. I'm new to this. So is there much of a difference between native flowers and drought resistant flowers?
There are, and to answer that question, which is a bigger one, you can go onto the Bringing Back the Native Garden Tours website.
Okay.
You can go from there to the tour's YouTube channel. There are plenty of talks on the YouTube channel. Doug Tallamy, there's a link to his talk, and you should really listen to his talk, and that will tell you everything you need to know about why you should be planting with natives and not with drought tolerant plants.
Oh, okay. So it's better to do the natives. Okay. Interesting. All right. I will
Sorry, I was
have
just
to look
gonna
that
answer.
up.
Okay, let's get back to Rebecca.
Okay, yeah. So going back to the board discussion. So, you know, one idea in order to influence what happens in your HOA is obviously to join the board. Does anybody else have other ideas for getting closer to that critical mass and tipping point?
We don't have them with us tonight, but the last time this group met, we had woman from HOA, a large HOA in Emeryville, Watergate, and a woman from Piedmont Retirement Community. And they both talked about the education that they had done for their members, that they put articles in the monthly newsletter. Mary Lee from Watergate made a booklet on native plants. The woman from Piedmont bought these beautiful signs, the Keystone Species signs that Jennifer Durking made, which are on the Bringing Back the Natives Garden Tour website. They can be downloaded and printed, but she actually bought a nice set that I had printed, and they had meetings and they had Jennifer come to speak. And the idea was, I think they were going to put those beautiful signs that Jennifer made like in the hallway so that people could see them. They featured plants. So a lot of it was education for the residents. And also one thing was the woman at Watergate, her key to success was the landscape. The guy who does a landscaper, I think his name is Juan or Carlos, I cannot remember, that he was in favor of. So he didn't balk when it came to changing plants and changing ideas. It made less work for him, was easier for him and his guys. And he was in favor of the native plant gardens and was supportive of the idea.
That's amazing. There's a slide about this later on that we'll get to, but I read some of your previous notes and went through the slides from, you know, what your members had accomplished. And again, from a management perspective, it's very impressive that they did what they did. So it's cool to hear what their, you know, as you said, your keys to success were. Okay, so as you were saying, one of the hard truths is that a lot of the commercial landscapers really don't know how to maintain native plants. This is not trying to throw shade on them at all. It is nobody's fault. You know, I think a lot of experts don't necessarily know how to maintain native plants. Two people who know how to maintain native plants might have completely differing opinions on how to do that. Some people say you don't do anything at all. You know, so it's but it's a challenge from the landscaper's perspective because the minute you make a misstep, you know about it immediately. Landscaping is very I don't know how to put it. People do not hesitate to let you know when they're unhappy when you're on the side of the landscapers. So one idea is, you know, there's a lot of native plant experts in your group. Hosting native plant maintenance workshops would probably be an amazing thing for you to do with whoever your commercial landscape provider is. And secondly, I have to emphasize, please give landscapers the benefit of the doubt. They really are at the brunt of so much ire. I have personally been spit at. Some of my employees, some of my employees have been assaulted physically. You know, we got cursed at all the time. It's a amazingly, I don't know, it's a subject that really draws a lot of emotion out of people. So, you know, again, a lot of the times the landscapers are working on minimum wage and they're working hard and they're doing the best that they possibly can. So please just give them the benefit of the doubt. Make sure they know that you are on their team and they are on yours.
I'm curious, what were the things that got people so hot?
You know, sometimes you prune something at a time. Like I'll give you an example. One time I was personally out pruning rosemary. It had just barely finished flowering. There were still some flowers on the plant, and I was pruning it to try and promote a second bloom. And a woman walked by and basically started cursing me out and said, you know, as soon as it starts to look good, you feel that you must destroy it. Comments like that all the time. It doesn't matter. Like it almost has nothing to do with landscaping at that point. But yeah, it's a lot of, you don't know what you're doing. You know, that plant is dead. How come you haven't done this? how come you haven't read my mind? Yeah, it's an interesting industry in that way.
It's very true with HOA. It's one of the most sensitive subjects in HOAs.
Yes, it
And
really is.
what we've done here is, because they did hard prune one time, the whole community, and these beautiful plants went all the way down to the ground. And people were calling in the property management and yelling at the landscapers, and everybody was screaming. But what we found to alleviate all that is to send a letter out before it happens,
Yeah.
couple weeks before, and let everybody know this is what we have to do to make the plants look beautiful. So that's how we solve that problem.
Yeah, it's so true. Communication is key, and expectations. You have to
Mhm.
manage expectations. Because if
Yeah.
something happens that somebody isn't expecting, they might freak out. But if they're expecting it, then the whole world changes.
Right.
Okay. So one of the things that was very difficult to deal with, again, at Rossmoor, our palette was so restricted to begin with because we had this massive deer population. I mean, that just cuts the amount of plants that are available for you to use to solve problems with down to near nothing. And then, of course, you're also designing for drought. So that also, limits the plants that you can use. You want to make sure you're choosing plants that are low maintenance, plants that are pest and disease resistant. And then it was also really important that we were choosing plants that were not going to create a fire risk. And, a lot of California native plants, as you guys all know, have co-evolved with fire. And so, some of them can encourage fire. So that becomes a limiting factor. So for me, and here is where I will probably differ and maybe alienate other people in the group, I'm a big fan of a native first attitude, using natives wherever you can, but also knowing that sometimes there is a landscaping problem to solve and you need to find the right plant for the right place, and that might not be a native. So again, that's in my opinion corner. Okay, so now there's a couple of strategies that I found worked for slowly incorporating native plants. The first one was to start small and incorporate natives slowly, get people accustomed to them, and to substitute some of the traditional favorites for native alternatives. So the plants on the bottom here were some of my favorite plants to use. Arctostaphylos is always a heavy hitter, and a great substitute for boxwood, not to be shaped in the same way, but as like a green hedge kind of thing. Verbena de lamina was always really useful, blooms nearly year round, looks kind of like lavender. Calamagrostis foliosa for areas that are not in direct sun and are not overly dry. And the Matillaha poppies I always loved. And so I never used them as direct substitutes for these plants, but they fit the same purpose in a lot of ways as some of these other plants did. Secondly, I really like demonstration gardens for a lot of reasons. For one, it accustoms the communities to the life cycle of the native plants. So again, over time, they learn what to expect. It sets a really positive example. Native gardens are very eye-catching when they're in bloom. So having some that people can see and be inspired by was always helpful. And also don't forget to incorporate benches. Because, part of the joy of a native garden is how alive it is with all the insects and the birds and everything else. And you don't necessarily see that unless you spend a little bit of time there. So benches are important. And this is where the educational signage comes in, because now you really have a chance to frame out exactly the information that you want people to know about exactly the plants that you want them to know about. It's also great for testing plants. Demonstration gardens are like safe places where you can say, oh, I don't know if this plant's going to work or not. I'll throw it in the ground, see what happens. Another sort of controversial strategy is identifying logical areas for native plants. So I think in an urban environment, sometimes you need to ask yourself, is a native approach the most appropriate thing for the entire community? or can it be concentrated in certain corridors that are designed for that? And riparian areas where wildlife is particularly prevalent. So this is a useful strategy if you have a community that's particularly resistant and they really want to stick with the whole ornamental landscape overall. But if you can pick some areas that will be particularly beneficial to use native plants, that's one way to slowly incorporate them. And finally, it's so important to create allies. A lot of people were accidentally alienating each other because they are all so passionate about their thing that sometimes it can come across as, you know, trying to tell other people what to do, or, you know, being more righteous or this or that. So it's really important to always remind yourself and the people around you that you are on the same team,
for 5 minutes.
striving for the same goal. 5 minutes. So do we have 5 minutes, Kathy? You're muted now, so I can't hear you, but I heard 5 minutes.
I'm sorry, that was my husband ordering our dinner. So
Oh.
I've just muted us. Please take your time.
Okay. So, you know, setting others up for success. So, you know, you gave the example of the landscaper that you were working with not being afraid of the native plants. A problem that we run into a lot with landscapers, again, is that somebody sort of says, I want all these plants to be native, but will also, how do I say this? The people that are not appreciative of the native plants, the landscapers are the ones that are there kind of answering for it. So if you have that teamwork mentality, you know, like, okay, I'll do the communicating, I will manage the people, you manage your thing, together we're going to succeed. That's really important. And I'm a big fan of leading by example, meaning showing, not telling. People don't like to be told what to do. They just don't. So, you know, the more you can demonstrate native gardens and their benefits and let these people witness them with their own eyes, then you have a subscriber permanently, as opposed to somebody who is really reticently, you know, sort of going along with what you're trying to tell them. It's important, particularly from a management perspective, to be not just empathetic to opposing views, but really welcoming them so that you understand what is going on for each person. Because, you know, some people's values differ. You know, not everybody, no two people are the same. No two people see things the same. So, you know, you have to at least hear what it is that they have to say, and you can agree to disagree with them. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're right and they're wrong, or they're right and you're wrong. And then finally, you know, an HOA has these inherent built-in limitations. And that is what makes an HOA good and what makes an HOA bad. So in order to make sure, again, that you're not alienating other residents and you're not alienating the board, I found that it was much easier when people were trying to achieve a goal within the boundaries that were set out by the HOA. And so if those boundaries need to be changed, that's one thing. But stepping outside them can cause a lot of problems for everybody, not least of which management.
Like, what kind of boundary would an HOA have that somebody who's interested in gardening with natives, like, might need to get something changed at the board level?
That's a good question. I can give you some examples. At Rossmoor, residents can't plant anything. So what would happen is people would go out and they would plant stuff. You know, they do guerrilla planting, and you're sort of, on one hand, you're like, yeah, good, go for you. You know, good, go for you. On the other hand, you're like, well, now you're blocking a sprinkler, and now you set this precedent. So now people are out there dropping bamboo in the ground and invasive plants, and, you know, one person does it and it creates this massive landslide. So, you know, maybe you need to somehow adjust that rule if you're in a smaller HOA where that's possible. So that's one example. That's really the best example I can think of, just because of the very restrictive rules of that particular group of HOAs.
That was a good one. Pyramid, do you have your hand up? You want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, so I'm unmuted. Yeah, I'm sorry, my phone's ringing. Just give me a second, it'll go away.
Thank you.
Well, you're
So
welcome.
I live in Castro Valley, and I'm actually a board member of our HOA. I'm also the chair of the landscape committee now. But we haven't, Kathy will know, we do have a native garden in our community. And she's been on your garden tour. I've actually volunteered at her house. So at that time when that was the first native garden that went up here, and that poor lady had the hardest time getting it approved because the landscape committee, they could only describe a native garden as weeds. So it was the look of it. And it took, of course, I wasn't on the landscape committee then, but I was in favor of the native garden. And it took, I mean, she had to fight tooth and nail to approve that. And it's because it's really ignorance. You know, they just think it's a bunch of weeds, and that's the problem with the HOAs.
Sure.
I know it firsthand.
Now I'm curious, Paramit, because Cindy Simons, now her garden is, it's probably at least 10 years old, and it's spectacular. It's beautiful in the front. It's beautiful in the back. So what do people think now? It's not, she had troubles in the front, I know, with her bunchgrass lawns that, you know, were weedy and they didn't look that great, but over time, the garden became gorgeous. So what do people think now?
They still don't. There are people who still think it looks like weeds. And I'm starting to go native. I have to admit, I still have a little bit of a lawn. I can't give it up yet. And I'm also a retiree from East Bay Mud, so I'm very familiar with, you know, with them. So yeah, the people are still, they still think it's weedy and it just looks like a jungle because there's that part that just wants a nice clean lawn. We have a lot of the artificial turfs now, and people just love those.
That's so interesting because Cindy Simon's garden, she has many different varieties of manzanita, ceanothus. It's a very well-tended garden, you know, with a well-tended path, and like a native plant garden really can't look any nicer than her garden looks. So
I know.
That's a lawn love. Like if you just can't be satisfied by anything but a lawn, then nothing will do. But for a non-lawn garden, like she's just got a gorgeous garden. I mean,
mine is getting there gradually, like half and half. But you know, I'm starting out slow, and mine is a DIY too, so it's taking time. But people here still don't like native gardens.
Well, don't take too long, Paramit. You know, I want your garden on the tour one day, and I'm getting old.
Oh goodness me! I doubt he'll ever make it there. But I tell you, I'm really loving these talks, and even the previous one. They're absolutely great. You talked about the lady from the Watergate and the Piedmont one. They're really, I wish people could just look at this and it would definitely change their mind.
Yeah. All right, let's go back to Rebecca now. Rebecca?
Yeah, well, actually, so I think I'm all done. I think the next slide was just, you know, what are some strategies that have worked for you? We talked a lot about education. That's a good one. And, you know, yeah, anything else that the group wants to share about things that have happened or challenges they've come up against, or, you know, any problems we can work through together?
I have a question. Rebecca, do you work for a particular landscape company?
No, I worked for Brightview in the past, and then I worked for a community called Rossmoor.
Okay, so you work for Rossmoor now?
No, not anymore.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I worked there in the past.
Because it's very hard to find good landscaping companies.
Yeah, it's
We're
true.
on the search. We're interviewing people now, and I mean, there's some good ones, but you know, we're kind of. You have to interview them all very thoroughly because we ended up with one that wasn't too good, and we have had a lot of backlash from our members here. So
yeah. I would say that the most important things to do when interviewing a landscaping company is go and see other properties that they manage.
Yes.
Yeah.
So is Rossmoor a good one to go look at? Is that all native?
No, it's definitely not all native. Actually, a very small amount of the plants there are native. But also because it's broken up into 22 HOAs, they're not all managed by the same person. Some are managed by Brightview, some are managed by a company called Terra. And yeah, for a little while, Gachina was managing some areas of it. So it's tricky, but it's also a private community. So, it's not that difficult to sort of go and say, I want to take a look, I'm interested.
Yes,
But it's gotten harder and harder over the years to get in unless you're a resident.
I see.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely not a native garden demonstration
Oh,
area.
okay.
So is there pressure on the landscaping companies to learn natives? Like I've gotten so many calls from people at Rossmoor over the years who are interested in having a native garden or a native demonstration garden, and other HOAs as well. And they just get a lot of flack from their landscaping companies. And it seems to me, not living in one and having my own garden, right, that a landscaping company could either like get with the program and learn how to manage natives, or they should find somebody else who will. Like the company's being paid and they work for the board. And if the board really does want them to manage a demonstration garden or something, shouldn't they have to, just because they work in the field, learn?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say that going back to some of the things we talked about before, no two people can necessarily agree on how they should be managed. So if there was a standard, I think that would be easier. There is also, again, the landscape companies only push back on these things because, again, they're the ones that look bad when expectations haven't been properly managed amongst the residents. And that's really the job of the board. So if the board is doing those communication outreaches that, we're going into the dormant season, or these things are going to be cut back really hard, or this, that, and the other thing, then it's really difficult for the landscape company to sort of stand up and do it the way that it needs to be done. So I think that it really just comes down to expectations and communication. And yes, there needs to be some good training there. But again, like even as a landscape professional, I couldn't give you a definitive answer on how native plants should be maintained. Obviously, each plant is different, but for me, I like to cut everything back by a little bit each year to keep it looking really nice and green. Other people say, well, the whole point of the native garden is that it's no maintenance. You shouldn't be doing that because you're disturbing its form. So, it's more subjective than it seems like it should be.
So if somebody turns, maybe it's that it would, it's not job security for the landscapers if you go to native planting, do you think? Or maybe that's why they're against it?
I think it's really just that it's really difficult for them to meet the standards and expectations that they are expected to uphold.
I see.
Because they just don't meet with, how a native garden looks. It's an entirely different animal.
Look, yeah, it's not as manicured and uniform as.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, what would the difference between a native garden and drought resistant be? What's the major difference? Drought resistant.
Maintenance-wise, very little. Native plants still require some maintenance, again, from a landscaping perspective.
Right.
So yeah, there's not that big a difference there. The huge difference is when you go from a lawn to anything else. Lawns are so high maintenance. That converting that to anything else, even if it's not drought tolerant, is an immediately massive drop in the amount of labor that needs to be put into maintaining it.
Okay, thank you for that.
Sure.
Rebecca,
Yeah.
what are some of the supply challenges? I've been in conversations with the city of Richmond and their landscaping department, and they say, well, we can't get the native plants. They're not available at the nurseries. How do you source your native plants?
I've never had a problem, but to be honest with you, I don't think I've ever done a native landscape on a scale big enough that that's been an issue. That said, a lot of the commercial nurseries don't sell their plants when they're dormant. So if you're trying to get, Asclepias or something in the middle of winter when it's dormant, they're not going to you're not going to be able to find it because they're not going to sell you what looks like basically a gallon of dirt. So I've come across that before, that certain plants aren't available at certain times of year. And that's not just for natives. That's any kind of plant that has a dormancy period. So yeah, I guess that's the only, during and after COVID, there was an issue with plant supply in general, because to grow something takes a minute. You don't get to do it and then sell it right away. So there was a supply chain issue there. But other than that, I haven't experienced that.
Thank you.
I think I put to your point, Rebecca, about the amount of maintenance. There was a comparison of 2 residential lots in Santa Monica where they converted
Garden.
Garden. And I put the link in there because what they demonstrated is that the garden, they had 2 neighboring houses that were essentially identical. They converted one from lawn to natives, and they measured how much water and how much maintenance hours and how much yard waste they were. And then they also looked at costs. And so the website that I put in the chat has the information there. So an HOA might be persuaded to do a small demonstration garden to see, because the savings in dollars were significant. So that might be one way to convince a board to convert some, if there's some land somewhere, there's a patch that, nobody's playing sports on, and maybe it's not, right out in front at the entrance where everybody sees it every day. Maybe they'd be willing to take a chance and see. But I think I wanted to talk about the maintenance a little bit because I'm not an HOA, but I was really interested in this because I'm interested in trying to get natives at schools, and I think maintenance is the same problem. So for grass, you learn one thing. There's one plant, and sure, you have to deal with it every week, and sure, you have to water it 2 or 3 times a week, but it's one plant, and you just have to know a finite set of things. If you have 20 native plants in a garden, now all of a sudden you need to know 20 different plants. You have to be able to identify them. You have to be able to know what their maintenance schedule is, which I personally have not found to be easy to find. I'm on a journey right now trying to find that, and but it's not easy. And then if you're the manager of your maintenance crew and you have to train all your people to understand all these different plants and what they're supposed to do when, it's a big change in the business model for a maintenance company. And so you almost need, in my opinion, you almost need something like a fine gardening skills almost, rather than just like a mow and blow crew, so to me, it seems like it would be a big change in the business model and the employee training and everything else.
I agree with you completely.
So
it seems like the key to making it happen in an HOA is to get the board to agree that they support the idea of a native plant garden someplace, and then to figure out how to manage it, whether it would mean hiring somebody else, like I know in Stephanie's place. You want to talk about your own?
Yeah, I mean, Mary, I relate a lot to what you're saying. I've had very similar thoughts. Like the maintenance is very different now. Before it was they would come every Wednesday, gas blowing, noisy, it was like every Wednesday I would groan and shut my windows. And now it's like, I think, we've got, we did hire more fine gardening, urban flora, landscaping, because we just needed very different things. And they're coming about quarterly. But then I'm out there plucking little weeds. There's just a lot. Yeah, like before, I'm sure there were weeds growing in the lawn. Who cared? They just got mowed. And now, there's natives that have reseeded. I love that. That's great. And then there's things creeping in, and thankfully I tend to know. I know, enough to know one from the other, or sometimes you watch something, but it's a lot more detail oriented, I would say now. And I think and then it's annoying when you got weeds growing up in your plants it's just more difficult to do that kind of detailed weeding. So yeah, I would say it's like quieter, but more detailed is what it is. And I think they're lucky that I enjoy weeding, because I think it would cost a lot to pay the people we pay to do all of it. They did some, but especially in the first couple of years when there's just more open space and things things are filling in, there's more room for weeds to grow in. So yeah, and Mary, I feel what you're saying a lot. That's what I'm dealing with.
Have you, what is the budget? You said they come quarterly now, so I assume they charge more for their services because there's a lot of training involved.
I didn't really have to do much training with them because she really knows what she's doing, but we did have to have a conversation about like, well, how long do you want these dried flower stalks with seed heads to be here? You're like, what's your feeling about that? So we did have to have a conversation about that, because yeah, like Rebecca was saying, some people want stuff left alone, some people want it chopped as soon as it's dried up. And sometimes I might want to collect, like in this courtyard, I let it look real dry because I wanted to collect the seed, the flowers, collect the seeds and distribute them places. No one complained somehow, but
So
I could
have ask you,
they could have.
What do your residents, and you're fairly small, you're like 15 units
like
or something?
15 units, yeah.
So what do people think now that it's been changed over and it's been a few years and the garden is a little more established? So do they hate it, or do they like it, or do they just don't look at it, don't care?
It seems, from the people I get feedback from, they love it. They just tell me we appreciate it so much. And we even had it was funny, you're talking about the Asclepias, the milkweed, and I had to cut them back, really far. And I was telling her, it's like, oh, they're starting to grow. And she's like, I'm so happy we're helping the monarchs. And so people, I would say overall, any feedback I get has been positive. Once we got through the trauma of getting rid of this woman's favorite plants in this courtyard that she cried about, I don't really hear from her. So, but the people I do hear from, I hear positive things. And then Rebecca, you talked about putting a bench in, and we actually finally have seating now in the front yard. So people are actually in it more than they ever were before, and get to enjoy it.
What year did you install the garden?
Like fall of 2022.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
fall
what
2022.
were the favorite plants that the woman was mourning over?
Oh, it was an ornamental ginger.
Huh, okay.
Looks good in Hawaii, not so much here. It looked like corn here because it didn't really flower.
Yeah.
And it kind of spreads with those rhizomes. She wanted it. Her vision was very tropical, like for us to be Hawaii, basically, but we're not.
So Stephanie, I remember when you gave the presentation last time, you said, and I can tell you why we didn't do this part, like part of your courtyard was done and part of it was still, I think, ivy. Do you want to, and I don't think you told that story, like why did you do part of it and you didn't continue on?
Yeah, well, and I will also say starting small was another thing I did. And I started with the ugliest part in the front yard that had been like ripped up by a plumbing project. So where anything I was going to do was going to be better than what was there. So that was part of the strategy. Start with the ugliest part. And then, a main reason, so yeah, the half that's on the other side of this bridge, you can't really see it, but it's ivy and azaleas. There's one tree fern left now, or going to be one left. Part of it, and I did plant a lady fern and a giant chain fern. So I was trying to infiltrate. My plan is to infiltrate slowly. If I was going to rip out all the azaleas, that's just not happening. Like those people love. Yeah, there would be hell to pay. Yeah. So it's like, knowing what and trying to rip out ivy, that's just not how I want to spend my life. And it's also a big cat toilet. So that's the cat sacrifice area, basically. As long as there are those cats here, they're going to be using that ivy as a toilet. And I'd rather them use that than the native plant area. So it's kind of and it's really not that big. Everything's so little here. So, and the hydrangea that we had to move from this side, that the woman's memorial cat hydrangea had to go over there. So it's like, she already made one change. I can't get rid of it. So that's where we are. And maybe I'll try to slowly replace the ivy with some other ground cover over time, but just it wasn't going to be a complete redo.
Mhm.
But if an azalea dies, it's not going to be replaced by another azalea, is my plan.
Good. Mary,
We'll
did
see
you
how
have
it
a
goes.
comment or a question?
I did want to ask, the area that you converted, was it, I guess I'm curious if you have any numbers at all to compare maintenance costs before and after. Or if it's possible to get that, because
I have to say it's kind of the same right now. I mean, ours is very cheap. I mean, we were getting, so the mow and blow guys were charging us $350 a month. And then I don't know if they charge more when they did extra pruning. And then we got, it was about 1,000 something ish for this first quarter of work, which did involve more tree pruning and some other stuff that I'd say was kind of, there was a maintenance backlog of it. There was a freak out initially about like, oh my gosh, this is a really big bill, we got to stay on budget. And I had to explain like, well, they're going to come quarterly. So if you divide this by 3, it's less than what we were paying before, a little bit. So it is about the same. I think if I wasn't doing extra, I don't know if we'd be able to afford it. I'm really limited to keeping that. That's been a big challenge with the maintenance, is finding someone who could do fine gardening, but keeping within the existing budget we had.
But it should be reduced over time, don't you think, when your plants get larger and are more established and require less? Like there was a period when my garden was really well established, and honestly, I hardly had to work on it at all. And then we lost some plants and tore some out, and now that there's empty space, I have to get in there and referee more. But it really was very low maintenance when it was mature and stable.
Yeah, that's what I look forward to. Yeah.
What's the name of your complex, Stephanie, if you don't mind me asking?
I don't know if it's just like Morton Place HOA. I don't think if you Google it, anything will come up because it's pretty tiny. But yeah, I am also curious about any other challenges people are facing that perhaps this group and Rebecca can help with some ideas.
I just wanted to make sure, was it Carla that was asking, that said she was looking for a maintenance company?
Yes.
Yeah, did you hear Stephanie sounds like she's happy with hers. I don't know if it's anywhere.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, where are you where are you located?
I'm in Marin, but we have 224 units here, so I don't know.
I think that's bigger scale than she does. She's like her and 2 guys.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Another thing I found that was important is that it's always her and her same 2 guys, because we had a previous company that was local. It was really great in the beginning. But then they kept having different people come. And I specifically said one time, I just planted these Carex Cola.
Yeah.
This is not a weed. Make sure it doesn't get pulled. And they wiped out all 8 of them and didn't pull the weed. And I was like, I'm sorry. We're done. Because, when the thing got communicated to the person in charge, it didn't get passed down. And no one, I was like, that was like the 3rd strike. So
it's such a common
we had to break up.
You brought up Brightview, and I think we were going to interview them, but I forget what it was that we didn't. I think they're located in Santa Rosa. Is that it? Do you know?
They're everywhere. They're nationwide. They're the largest landscaping company in the United States now. Yeah.
I think with being in Marin, they want to go with somebody local. There's Gardeners Guild. They do Yerba Buena Gardens. They do a lot of HOAs in Marin. And then there's also another company called Soul. That's a newer company in Marin.
I think
could I recommend
Sure.
Vayu from East Bay Wilds, and you can find the contact information on the Bringing Back the Native Garden Tour website under Find a Designer. And Pete does design, installation, maintenance, consultations. He has his own native plant nursery. He's very knowledgeable. He's got a crew, so you might want to.
What's the name of it?
It's East Bay Wilds. You can go to the Bringing Back the Natives Garden Tour website. Look on the left-hand side, about halfway down the line of poppies is, thank you so much, Stephanie, is an area called Find a Designer. It's easy for any garden to be ugly if it's designed by a banker or a dentist
Yeah.
or somebody who's not a designer. Like
Right.
there's a big skill in designing, you know, there's value in
Mhm, yes.
gardens, but you know, they lack, you know, they lack the experience and the skill and like the gorgeousness that a professional brings. But anyway, the
Exactly.
gardens there under Find a Designer, those gardens are all professionally designed and they're beautiful photos of native plant gardens.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So Pyramid, I'm curious, are you still with us? So in your board, like, do you have people who like would lean toward native plants if they were kind of brought along slowly, or is your board like pretty set on we love grass? And would they, but don't they all have to do away with the grass, like all those parking strips?
Yeah,
And
the
front
board, you know,
yards?
yeah, the board members really don't have much to say about it. The landscape committee is the one, and we do have the previous person who ran the landscape committee, it was her. They're gone now. So now people are more open to it, but they're still wanting to pull out turf and put in what I call the carpet. The green
Oh, the
carpet.
fake lawns.
That
Because they
is-
think that's the least
Ugh.
maintenance.
It gets
And-
filled with so many weeds. I wish I could I should send you a photo of my neighbor. You know, and I walk by, and then you have plastic with weeds growing through it, and it
Yeah.
looks like
And it's
garbage.
hot
And
and it
it's
kills all the
disgusting.
light, all the soil life underneath it. Certain
Ugh.
cities are banning it now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
we do-
plastic. It's not good for the environment.
yeah, and they're gonna ban that the carpeting too pretty soon.
Yeah.
That's on the list as the next ban. But yeah, the you know, every time somebody redoes, they do anything to their yard besides just pulling out a shrub, or sometimes if they pull out a shrub, we tell them they have to replace it if it leaves a big empty spot. But you know, they're still not headed towards natives. They want to do rock and just put in some, you know, artificial stuff and be done with it.
You know, if you could, you should watch a Doug Tallamy talk together, like just make it a pizza night and bring popcorn, really, because he's so compelling that I've known people who like just like couldn't care less about natives, people who heard me talking for years and just felt like it was like I was a Hare Krishna and it was fine for me, but they weren't going there. But then they hear Doug Tallamy talk and you know they were motivated and they changed their own gardens to natives. So he's so convincing that I think you should try to get your landscape committee just over lunch one time to or just one at a time if you need to watch it repeatedly with your friends one at a time and get people to see it.
We have 541 homes up here, and that one is the only one that's really native. We have another DIY that she did herself, which is pretty good, because she even put in the irrigation and everything herself. But yeah, we're just, you know, I'm transitioning. I pull out a shrub and then I try to put in a native. And I have bought some plants I've been to Pete Valou's place, the East Bay Wilds guy, and it was very educational.
I'm curious that new California law, like where Pyramid lives, is like a housing tract, you know, where the HOA takes care of the parking strip, I think, and the homeowner takes care of the front yard, but it has to be approved. Does that fall under the private homes exemption
so.
from the lawn, or do they have to also remove the lawn from the parking strips? Does anybody know?
No, we don't do it. Each house is its individually. We're all single family units, and the HOA has nothing to do with any of the maintenance in the yards. It's all on you know the person. So there's no HOA maintenance of anything here.
And so that California law, it will not apply to you guys because you're all private homes. Yeah, okay.
During the presentation, though, there was a lot of questions around that, including from myself, because it's confusing that, you know, HOAs do have to remove their lawns, even if the units are individually owned. So I don't know, Pyramid, your community might still have to comply. It's a little confusing the way it's written.
Yeah. I mean, I'll have to be one of them. Hopefully by then I'll have because you know East Bay Mud has this great program where they actually give you some money for doing it all.
The rebates,
but there's little, you know, stringent on the requirements too, because we did around our pool house, when we redid that, we took advantage because we had lawn there and we took advantage of that. But they were, yeah, it was, the HOA wasn't happy with some of the things they wanted us to do, like put in the pressure regulators and things, but it had to be a certain kind that cost so much, you know, to get back $10, you had to spend $400. But yeah, we're, you know, some of them have taken advantage of East Bay Mud's rebate. And I should do it, but I'm a little holdout.
So Mary, I know you were interested in maintenance cost comparisons, and I know a school, it's a private school, Prospect Sierra Elementary School in El Cerrito, I think. And they took out 5,000 square feet of front lawn and put in a native plant garden. And that's like probably 5 years or so ago now. I could try to show you a picture if I could. Should I try to show you a photo? Yeah. Oh, I see. Can you help me share? Can you help me get the garden tour website up? I mean, can I share it?
Trying to share screen.
Cancel.
Cancel this one here?
Yeah, you can't go
After, you have to go before. Oops, did I just cancel the whole meeting? Good.
No, we're here.
Oh, good. How do I help
Okay, close the Zoom, that,
close this?
yeah,
one
close
here?
that.
Okay,
Okay, go to the app, the Zoom app.
here. You know where I really want to get to? I really want to get to my photos file. Can I do that? Like, that's where I want to go.
Okay,
Can I go there?
here you go.
Okay, great. So let's see, it's Prospect Sierra.
No one can see it.
No one can see it because I'm not sharing.
Yeah, you gotta hit that green
Hold on, don't, no,
share screen.
open that up again.
Share.
No, no,
No.
close that. Open the photos.
This is just killing. Okay, open photos. Okay.
Share.
Share. Now share. Okay. God. All right. And then where is it? There it is.
Yeah, I don't see anything. Oh, there it is. Okay, it's kind of, there we
I
go.
would size it more appropriately. It's half off the screen. There you
Yeah.
go.
Okay. All
Okay.
right. So prospects here. My photos are not.
Careful you don't try to leave that chair and hit your table.
Okay.
Oh, I see it. Oh, there it is.
Sierra. Okay. So here's their very large former front lawn.
Oh.
And this is inside the school. It was so successful in the front that they started taking little garden patches inside the school. And here's an in progress photo. Let's see. I mean, the difference in maintenance and water must be tremendous from what they had before. So if you like, Mary, I could put you, and this is that little patch where we saw the two teachers. I think this is that patch. Cindy Simons is the one, the garden that Paramit has been talking about. This is a new meadow. It was just put in last year, but here's the front yard. I mean, I think it's just beautiful. It's got a lot of manzanitas, ceanothus.
It's just so much more interesting. Like, isn't lawn just so
Yeah.
boring? by
So boring.
comparison?
I know. I find this rows of lawns depressing. I don't know. Yeah. I am older. Yeah.
These look gorgeous though.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
trying to find-
spectacular.
trying to find, this is her new
Oh,
meadow.
wow. Wow.
I was trying to find another front yard photo. Here's front yard photo. And she made a nice video. She had featured her garden on the
Tour.
tour, the virtual tour, a couple of years ago. This is what the backyard used to look like before. Like, that's not so lovely to me.
Thank you. That was very informative.
Yeah, this is great. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, Rebecca,
you.
that was terrific. I really enjoyed
Yeah,
the
thank you.
presentation, very well organized, and I really enjoyed, it did give me a new perspective for the landscape company and also for like the who's in charge and where the where the energy needs to be going, meaning the board of directors or the landscape committee, to
Yeah.
convince them, and then the tentacles of reaching out through education to the rest of the members to bring them along.
Yeah. Well, and I really appreciated Stephanie's approach where Stephanie said like she started small, where you do the, what do you call it? Like proof of concept. And then people are like, oh, okay, I get it. Yeah, now we can do it.
I just wanted to put one more thing out there. This is more about schools and stuff, but there have been a lot of studies that tie better academic performance and less mental stress to trees and nature. And at least one of the studies that I read said specifically, lawn didn't produce these benefits. It's like trees and other, shapes and green shapes and forms and stuff like that. So I just we're saying, oh, it's more interesting to look at, but I think there's also actually health benefits to having something besides just plain lawn.
Mental health and physical health. And also I think that rang true not just for lawn to not lawn, but with regard to native plants, which is more being in nature because you have more birds and more wildlife there. Well, you guys, it was really fun.
Thank you.
Rebecca, you gave a terrific presentation. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. That
Thank
was
you. It's fun
so
being
helpful.
here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.